So, Councilman, just give us an overview of why you came through, how you came about to this legislation, and what really made you push for it.
So I think, so first of all, James, thank you for having me. And of course, thank you for the recognition as it relates to the award. I love what you're doing, and anything I can do to support, I'm here. But I think you talked about how we got to the point was just a set of lived experiences, right? Like these are things that are cultural norms for us as it relates to how we buy cars, how we move throughout the city, that feeling you get in the bottom of your stomach when you've been followed for a few blocks. And, we all know how it goes to the uncomfortable searches that happen when they search you and search your car. And I think for me, once I got into council, clearly this was a focus of my campaign. Like you said, I campaigned twice, had two losing campaigns before my winning campaign. And it's something that I had always focused on. So when I got into office, it was a matter of having the right conversations with the right legal experts. And lucky for me, a conversation with our former Chief Public Defender, Kira Bradford Gray, and working side by side with her put us in a position where we felt like we could find a legal precedent to be able to pass legislation to address this issue. And so looking at other different initiatives that have come out of the city that talks about enforcements of laws and enforcements of practices. You have how we do small amounts of marijuana. That's an example, right, of enforcement and how you create legislation around enforcement. You also have my colleague, Councilman Johnson, what he did with chokeholds and banning chokeholds by law enforcement. And that's, again, the type of enforcement practices that we have. So those two different pieces of legislation basically laid the foundation for us to find precedent around traffic stops. And that's how we were able to find a legal way to introduce the legislation around driving equality. And of course, after the legislation was introduced, the real work actually began.
Yeah. And, and when you say that, like, with the chokeholds and the different things you guys are doing, are you getting blowback maybe from like some Harrisburg politicians that are saying, you know what, well, we're going to write something that trumps what you did? Like, are you seeing that back and forth come about with some of them, or?
Well, we haven't seen any type of counter legislation. We've seen some counter arguments, and we've heard some counter arguments and seen some counter narratives. And everybody's entitled to their opinion as it relates to the legislation. We feel like we got it right. We feel like it's something that's going to have a positive impact on the city. Everybody doesn't agree with it, so it's been some blowback, but not any legal blowback, not anything to question the precedent. And that's just not yet. The bill technically hasn't been signed into law by the mayor. So at the end of the day, once that happens, then the clock will begin to tick on whether we'll see some type of rebuttal legislation or some type of legal challenge.
And I mean, you kind of, well, we know the Republicans were going to vote for that, right? Like we know, like that's just not for the narrative that they can portray, right? Right. Like now they couldn't vote for that. But I mean, when you were passing that, because in 2012, I think Curtis Jones did the first attempt at the Police Reform Commission, the Police Oversight Commission as an elected body. I think he did that in like 2012 or 2011, sometime back then. But I know that sat for a while, right? So all of a sudden, bang, new group of council people come in, you, KGR, y'all come in and y'all get to work. And now we're seeing these changes. Was it hard getting some of the old guard on board? I doubt that Curtis Jones gave you any pushback. I mean, you got a 14-2 victory, which is almost a clean sweep in council. But was there a lot of like back and forth talk you had to sell people on this, or everybody's like, yo, we're with you right from the jump?
So I think it was a combination. Like some council members were with me from the beginning just because they understood what it is that I was trying to do, and they also recognized the problem that we had. Other council members were worried about legal precedent, and that took a lot of time. And then you had other council members who were worried about the actual guidelines that we were moving from primary reasons to secondary reasons. So every council member has their own vested interests based on the demographic they represent as far as the part of the city of Philadelphia, as well as the things that they prioritize. And so for me, it wasn't a difficult process selling the premise because almost everybody recognized that there was a problem. The difficult side was to come to the areas that we could agree can be comfortable, that would be considered a primary, that would be considered a secondary reason to be pulled over instead of it being a primary reason to be pulled over. And it took a lot of work. I mean, we had to come to an agreement with law enforcement and the administration as well too. So, you know, it was a consistent working group that collaborated for over a year to be able to come up with legislation that everybody was comfortable with. And even then, we still had to offer amendments even after that, just so that we could have what we felt like was the best possible bill. And that's where we are right now. So it took me over a year. I mean, the bill was introduced in its original form in 2019. And then it gets reintroduced in June of 2021. I'm sorry, 2019. Introduced in its original form in 2020. And then it get reintroduced again in June of 2021, and doesn't get passed into law until this fall. So very time consuming, absolutely, no question about it. But that's what it takes to get something like this done and get it done in a way that is effective.
You know, and let's go on something you said, because you mentioned with the administration, and I know that you had to have some, I guess, conversations with law enforcement at the top levels about how this is applied. I know you made some adjustments as far as, you know, different things that would still be calls to get pulled over, like loud exhaust systems or whatever they were working on, right? Like, I guess that's like for that drag racing stuff that occurs in that part of the city, right, where you get all the complaints from people who live in Jersey about they can hear it from Philadelphia, right? So, I mean, you know, just to clear the record, you did get a lot of buy-in from law enforcement, and you did have conversations. Because I think some people think, you know, you just flew out there with this, and like you're like an anti-cop guy, and I don't think this is that kind of legislation. I think you did get some participation and some ideas from them on how things would go about.
We had a working relationship with the Philadelphia Police Department for over a year. The police department testified in favor of the bill coming out of committee. They participated in town halls. One was even live on WURD, where they talked about their position on the bill, why they were in favor of it, and what they felt like it would do to the city of Philadelphia. So no, this is definitely not something that's anti-police. This is something that's pro-Black. And unfortunately, when you do things that are pro-Black, people always try to craft and create a narrative that is something different than that. That's all this is. This is for folks like you and me who grew up with that feeling in the pit of our stomach, for those of us who've been in some of those rough, uncomfortable searches, for those of us who live life the right way every single day and still are scared to buy certain cars and drive in certain neighborhoods because you know that you're putting yourself in a position to increase the probability of being pulled over. And then what happens when we get pulled over? We blame ourselves, right? We say, oh, I was doing too much. I was drawn.
Exactly.
And the reality is like everybody who don't look like us don't have that to worry about. So, you know, we all who wake up every day and do things the right way deserve an opportunity to live a safe life. And I think that it's important that we think about all means and mechanisms as it relates to what safety consists of. And I think that this is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you know, it was once that my dad would say, hey, don't wear baggy pants or don't wear a hoodie because you don't want to draw that attention. Or, you know, with your car already, don't put the tint on the windows, too much tint, or don't play your music too loud. You ride past the cop, you turn down your music. I mean, you know, to me, you know, for the people who say this bill, and I've heard this bill makes it harder for cops to do his job, right? I think that's false. I think the biggest problem, one of the problems we have in Philadelphia is that a lot of people, especially minorities, African American males, we lost trust in the police, right? We don't feel like we trust them, right? Because of these stops, right? Like stuff like this is the reason why, man, I don't mess with cops. I don't trust cops, man. I don't be bothered with them. And that's part of the reason why we have a crime problem is because cops don't have the buy-in in the community. I think this takes us a step further in actually helping to change the narrative on our crime in our communities, because you don't have that fear of the cop. Future generation of young Black males are not going to grow up being fearful of that stop because of the legislation you did. And that's going to have a better relationship.
I agree with you 100%. And, you know, the data says that these type of stops, less than 1% of the time, lead to a weapon and or contraband. So, you know, we're definitely not trying to tie law enforcement hand. I think if anything, we're trying to be more efficient as it relates to what we're asking them to enforce, right? Like these are things that currently they're required to enforce. If we can free up some of their time, we know that officers spend, you know, hundreds of thousands of hours a year on traffic stops alone, just traffic stops and traffic enforcements. And again, these are the traffic stops that less than 1% of the time lead to contraband and or weapons. So I don't think we're tying their hands. I think we're freeing their time. I think we're doing what you said as it relates to improving relationships between law enforcement and communities of color, so the next generation of young people don't have these rites of passage stories that you and I are sharing like it's math class, right? Like this isn't the way it's supposed to be. But unfortunately, it's the way it is. And I'm hoping that this bill is a step in the right direction to do something about it.
I think it is, Councilman, and we don't want to take a lot of your time because that's what we really wanted just to get to the heart of this, and really let our readers, our listeners, our people in Uptown hear your story because, you're an Uptown guy, and growing up in the 14th Police District, highest amount of racial profile stops in the city, right? And this is a step, I think, for making us safer, making, and when you say safer, it's making us safer against bad cops too, right? Who use these stops, but also building better relationships with our community and the police because we're going to start seeing them in a more positive light. And they can spend time doing the things that really need to be done, like fighting crime, the serious crimes that matter, these homicides and these killings. I'm not worried about the person who's driving down the street with the busted taillight, and trying to play a broken windows theory and say, hey, smaller crimes add to bigger crimes. That theory has been proven wrong, and the data you have shows that. And we're just appreciative of you doing this again. You just keep getting it done since you've been in office. I expected this. I knew this because I saw your passion, but I'm a political nerd. You know what I mean? So I get it, but anything you want to say, before we wrap up on this bill or anything you got going on next that, our readers need to hear about coming up?
We're always trying to do the good work. What I'll say as we close out is I love those PIAA championship plaques in the background. And
you got some bigger ones, though. You got some bigger ones. I'm trying to get the one you got.
I got to step up my game. No, thank you, James. I appreciate you having me. Thank you for the great work you're doing. Of course, I love you. Listener audience is an important staple in the Uptown community, Uptown neighborhood where I'm from.